Hey y'all, this is Trans Cookout. It's like swinging on the porch, shucking corn, and shooting the breeze, but make it a podcast. Trans Cookout is a monthly live drop in and listening session hosted by me, Holiday Simmons, the Campaign for Southern Equality's Director of Healing and Resilience. I'll be in conversation with wellness practitioners and trans leaders as we discuss topics relevant to our communities, including wellness strategies and tools for liberation. Here is our latest episode. Welcome to the second episode of Trans Cookout, everybody. I'm so excited to have our special guest with us today, talking about trans rights and Indigenous medicine ways. Trans Cookout is a monthly drop-in space and listening series where we'll be talking to trans leaders, wellness practitioners all across Turtle Island, this land of ours, um, and giving people things to talk about, food for thought. And today I'm so honored to be in conversation with Laura Yohualtlahuiz
Close enough.
Rios-Ramirez. Let's pause.
Yes,
Let me see if I got that pronunciation.
it's Yohualtlahuiz.
Yohualtlahuiz.
Yeah.
Laura Yohualtlahuiz Rios-Ramirez, pronouns she and they, is a queer Mexican-born Xicana scholar, practitioner, researcher, narrative and cultural strategist of Tepehuan, Guachichil, Chichimeca, and mixed settler lineage, trained in educational pedagogy, circle keeping, performance art, and cultural organizing. They co-lead Kaupuli Ayolopatskin Patzin, a traditional Anahuaca clanship dedicated to preserving and retribalizing families to their respective indigenous lineages through Anahuaca dance, traditional healing, and kinship building. Lauder coins their life work as a cultural bearer as being a full spectrum rites of passage doula. Wait for this, y'all. Holding the sacredness of each stage of our lives. She has served as a birth, infant, loss, abortion, miscarriage, postpartum, coming of age, life, and death doula, and has received DONA certification in 2009. She's the co-founder and visionary behind De Corazon Circles. It was my mouth wanted to say it in Spanish, but I'm looking at English. A multi-talented and multifaceted creative consulting firm. Most importantly, Laura is a wife, a mommy, a tia, a madrina, passionate about healing intergenerational / colonial trauma through matriarchal leadership, cultural resilience, and folk life preservation. Laura, I'm so honored to have you. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Holiday. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. And, just to kick us off, I did read a lot, but tell us a little bit more about yourself. Couple words, couple things, just give us a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I was born in Mexico. That's why I say I'm like a Mexican-born Chicana. So I was born in Torreon, Coahuila. My grandparents are from the regions of Durango, Aguascalientes, and San Luis Potosí across both lineages, some intersecting. And I migrated to the United States at the age of 6. So, even though, I was born there, like I spent a lot of time, like a lot of my youth, just like going back and forth, between Mexico and the United States. So, that concept of just like not having borders was like always, a part of my upbringing. And so I kind of bring that both and the Nepantlera like concept, that a lot of scholars, have adhered to through Gloria Anzaldua's work and stuff, So, I grew up as a third generation matlachin dancer, which is a traditional dance that that, I mean, I guess it originates in Chichimeca territories, but so it's part of like northern Mexico. But it was like a missionized dance that was honored, that was to honor the Virgen de Guadalupe. So, throughout my life, I've always had that. And then in middle school, I kind of let it go, because of just, the pressures of teenage, assimilation and just like, just people not understanding what it was and me falling to the pressures of that at that age. But then I got into hip hop culture, so I did graffiti as a teenager, and my brother did breakdancing. My brother's name's Billy Rios. He's in spirit world now, but we kind of started our, hip hop journey, and hip hop culture was a big, big part of my life, and it always has been, so that's some of the work that I do too, is around like emceeing, and I was a B girl from like the time that I was like 19. I mean, up until now, because like Erica Badu says, once you're a B girl, you never stop. You won't stop.
I mean, I just feel like you gotta be. I just imagine. I can only imagine with all those different routes how you must be spinning on those cardboard boxes, or how you must have been in the '80s and '90s spinning on those cardboard boxes. Um, I call myself trying to do some breaking back in the day as well in the late '80s, early '90s. But that's awesome. I wanted to say, Laura, I feel like we are gonna later in the year have a show about trans rights and immigration rights, and I feel like there's so many shows that you could have been the guest on because of the multiple intersecting identities. We're not necessarily talking about immigration today, but I did just want to ask you something since you mentioned being able to go back and forth from your ancestral lands of Mexico to your current homelands in the U.S. Um, when you were a kid, you could cross that border easier, is what I think I'm
Oh
picking up on,
yeah.
right? Can you
Yeah,
just say
no,
a
and
little
it
bit about that?
wasn't, yeah, and it definitely wasn't like militarized in the same way that it is now, it's like so nerve-wracking, even when you do have like the documentation that is needed to go back and forth. But, I also grew up with my grandparents, like, I mean, my mom, the reason that we moved to the United States, right, was because, we were all in Mexico. My grandmother was from there, but she met my grandpa that was, this was on my matriarchal side, that was from Lockhart, Texas, and he was already like mixed or whatnot, and was born in Texas, but he was like a part of the braceros, program or whatnot, like, or in that era, of the braceros program, and he helped build a lot of infrastructure in Texas with the waterways, with like the dams and stuff, and my grandmother would come to Taylor, Texas, which was the town that we ended up moving to, and they were really well known for cotton fields. And so they picked cotton and they processed cotton. And my mom grew up like doing seamstress work. So they would sew like the mattresses and like the pillows and stuff like that. And so every summer, like they would come, to work. And my grandma would talk about, like, on my mom's side, would talk about how like they didn't need papers, like they just walked across and they came to work and then they would go back, and then they'd come back, and I mean, and this was in the summer too. So I was just like, man, y'all were out there working in the summer, like in these warehouses and stuff. So, it was definitely a lot easier. And, as far as like work goes, there wasn't all these limitations around like permits or whether you were like working legally or not
Right,
legally. Like there was a
right.
lot of like labor that was being outsourced to migrant workers, because that's what my family was migrant workers. So
Mm-hmm.
they would just come
Mm-hmm.
here to work seasonally, and then so when my parents divorced, like they already had like some community here, and my aunt was already here and had married my tío here and stuff. So it was just like a natural thing to do was just come to Texas.
Right, right. Wow. Wait a minute. So were these cotton fields on the U.S. side or the Mexico side?
Oh no, yeah, it was like in Texas, like Taylor,
Wow.
Texas. Taylor, Texas is about maybe like, let's see, like maybe like 5 hours from like the Texas US border of Laredo.
Okay.
So it,
Yes,
yeah.
that's so interesting. So I have heard that there was some cotton picking happening there. That's a huge part of my family history. My father was a sharecropper, and I that's why I have a cotton bowl in the logo of my wellness practice, Southern Soul Wellness, to pay homage to that. My mom was also a seamstress, actually
Oh,
a
wow.
line of seamstress, and that's part of why fashion is such an important medicine for me today. Just
Same,
the
same.
textiles, but I
Same.
just wanted to pause and share that because that is just not something that's talked about enough is this shared cotton experience between a lot of black folks in the South and a lot of Mexicano folks before even there was a US border, I believe. I'm imagine your ancestors were working with that crop before they were made to work from like a planter telling
Oh,
them to
yeah.
do it. And same West Africa has cotton, and so it's like I just want to pause for that connection and just share that I don't know much about that, and I would love to see a play about those intersections or something. Like
Let's
we
do
we
it.
have
Let's
a
do
lot of
it.
intersections between our two cultures, and that's not one that I knew about, so that's great.
Yeah, no, we should totally do it. And that, you're absolutely right. Like the ancestral connection to cotton's always been there too. Like one of the creation stories in a lot of like the Anahuaca cultures, and a lot of like the cultures of like what folks call Mesoamerica now, is Tlazolteo, who is the actually the one who accompanies people when they're birthing, so they're
Interesting.
like a doula, like a patron, and she has like little cotton ball spools in her hair because she's the weaver, so she like weaves the spirits from the ancestral world into the physical world, and so
Mm,
that concept of like weaving and
like the
cotton.
spider, yes.
Yes, exactly, like that's she's this the like she's the spider woman.
Ah,
Yeah.
so many connections.
I know. We should totally write the play.
We should
I'm
totally do a
down.
play. So I want to take our audience back a little bit to something you said and something I read in your bio. I think the term doula is becoming more popular and more people know, but just in case there's some folks out there, also there might be some youth listening to the show that don't know. Could you just give a short definition of what a doula is? And then I think you are a doula in a lot of different ways, not just the birthing way. So if you could just explain a little bit more about your work as a doula.
Yeah, so I was invited to get trained as a doula with the DONA certification in 2009 with one of my homegirls that actually runs a doula and birth worker, like BIPOC birth worker collective in Austin, Texas, called Birth Comadres. Her name's Iracema Reza Bailey, and we trained with some midwives and different things like that in 2009. So at that time, like I didn't really know what a doula was, but she was just like, you would be great at it. Like, you're just really good at holding space for people, and you're such a good listener. And we need bilingual people to help us with this project or this program that at the time was through Any Baby Can. And it was called GALS, and so it was like giving giving something labor support, so it was like labor support for non-English speaking folks that needed extra support in the hospitals because there was so much obstetric violence, that migrant women or migrant folks that were birthing um, were experiencing, in the hospitals, where they were being forced to have all these kinds of interventions and, things like that. So that's how it kind of got started. And then after I had my kids in 2012, then, it was just really hard for me to assist births at that point. But I mean, I did everything from like hospital births to like home births. I was there with my like friends that, were in my ceremony community, and like, and it really is just holding space for the people birthing, to be able to feel like comfortable and powerful in their birthing experience, or in whatever experience they're going through, right? Because then, later on, I since I couldn't focus so much on like birth work, I did a little more like postpartum like support, so postpartum doula work. But then, because of my because of the way that I build kinships and community around me and the ecosystems that I'm a part of, and, the trust that my community has given me to hold these kinds of, places of transition for them, like I've been asked to hold space for people's like aging parents, when they've been like, in hospice, or, are transitioning or dealing with, I've had friends that, were part of my community that were just like, hey, like I'm rejecting dialysis, and I know that once this goes down, like I'm just, like it's only a matter of time. Can you come see me and give me like a limpia and just hold space for me and my family, and so like at that time I was just like, I didn't really realize that that was being a doula either, like I just thought people just wanted me to come and like smudge them and play my flutes, or sing, play the drum or something. But the more that I started like holding that kind of space for folks having like abortion or miscarriage, or even like some of my relatives that, are going through like hormonal treatment, for either like menopause or like transitioning, into their gender identity, like holding that space through like pelvic floor, baths and stuff, yoni steams, things like that. Then, I really started realizing like, wow, I guess really like all of this is rite of passage, and so that's why I coined that part for myself. Like, like I can't really pinpoint, like I can't really say that I only do like birth work. Like I've been asked to do all kinds of stuff. So I'm like a full spectrum, like, and sometimes I'm just, and even like sometimes I tell my son, because, we talk about like death and dying, and he's really into spooky things, and, in order for them to like not get scared about me like passing away or something, I'm just like, when if I happen to die and I'm your ancestor, like, I'll help you be a scare actor, so like, because he wants to be a scare actor, so I'm just like, I'll tell them like, I'll be supporting you from the other side, So I think that even once, I leave this body, like I'll be dueling like some ancestral stuff, I think it's just part of the spirit of who I am, just to hold that space for folks to do
Yeah.
hard things.
That's so incredible. And I just want to uplift the importance of doulas in all of those different arenas that you spoke of, whether they be birth, death, or everything in between, and just uplift it as I'm so glad that it does have much more popularity now. It's much more accessible now. Not all places, everywhere, but I'm definitely hearing people use doula services in various ways now. And I just want to uplift how important that is as a throughway from or to from our ancestral wisdom to the present, but also so important in sort of hacking the medical industrial complex. If people have a baby in the hospital and get all the drugs, that's fine. Self-determination, everybody for themselves, every family, or not everybody should be able to choose for themselves in every family. And as you mentioned, those medical interventions that are disproportionately impact BIPOC birthing people. So thank goodness for antidotes like midwifery, like doulaing, and for traditional, medicine brought into even into a hospital space like that, or into the homes of people who might otherwise just be at the mercy of of doctors and professionals who it's it's an industry.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah,
I
it's
want
an
to thank you for that.
industry.
Yeah. And then I want to ask you,
Yeah.
you had mentioned as we were planning for this that you were doing a ceremony for one of your own children. And I would just love for you to share what a rites of passage coming of age ceremony might look like in your community or has looked like in your community, in terms of youth becoming young adults. I just want to frame, for our audience that I think the most popular cultural coming of ages for most folks might be aware of quinceañeras. In a lot of Latine cultures and Jewish cultures, you have bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. And so what in your particular indigenous community, what does the coming of age look like?
Yeah, so the way that we did the rite of passage for coming of age for our youth was, in our traditions, it's every 13 years is a rite of passage, right? So we're living in these cycles where, like, from 0 to 13, like you're just, like your baby, like you're just being cared for by your parents, your community. A lot of things are done for you, So we've been preparing our children, I would say, I mean, since they were babies, because we're just like, when you turn 13, you have to, how to do this and you have to do that. But also, like, our community was formed, not only from like with our spirituality and like our cultural practice as part of our resistance, because a lot of us were activists or people that have been directly impacted by, you know, um, just very like overtly racist experiences, or experiences where our poverty was criminalized, or the color of our skin, or like our cultural connection to land, migration and things like that were part of like something that put a lot of our families in danger, or in like having to deal with the prison industrial complex, the detention center industrial complex. And so it was really important for us as a community, because that was kind of like how we met, and through like the preservation of our cultures, we're just like, well, we take our activism on a different level. Like, not everything has to be like a protest, or not everything has to be like, like just us living and existing in the way that we were conditioned not to is resistance, right? And so, holding fast to our traditions has been part of our resistance. And also we know that because of like our predecessors, like we are products of like the Chicano movement, of the American Indian movement, of the Black Panthers movement, of the Young Lords, of a lot of those intersectional like movement, like trailblazers of the civil rights era, that formulated a lot of like our political understanding of the systems of white supremacy that are built to destroy us. So what we've done is like seen popular education as a rite of passage. So the journey for our young people was not only like ceremonial and ritual, but also like plugging them in to different community service projects, or things where they would have to like go out and like support houseless community, or like we also were able to get some partnership and some fundraising going to take not only our youth from like our families in our Calpuli, but also from one of our projects that we did as part of a participatory action research fellowship that resulted in a group of young people called Circles in the Hood, where we took about like 10 to 13 youth to the Highlander Center, right? And then our kids that were, 10 or 9 at the time, I guess like 9 to 12, attended the Children's Justice Camp. So those were some of the things that they did in preparation for the year. But then on top of that, like our kids have grown up going to sweat lodges, going to medicine ceremonies, going to, some of them have gone to Sundance, some of them have gone to, have been a part of like the Peace and Dignity, like spiritual runs, some different like locally specific spiritual runs, since they were little, so they've grown up with that ceremony. But we're just like, okay, by the time you're 4, you're gonna have to learn at least, 2 to 4 danzas that you lead, and one of them was mais, which is the corn, right? Honoring the corn, because our culture, that's one of the major like scientific contributions that we made to this continent, and that's what proves like our connection to land for millennia. I mean, not cotton, corn, was engineered by human beings, and it can only exist and continue like reproducing with the hands of human beings, right? Like it can't self-pollinate, like it needs human beings to plant it, and it was engineered by, like in around like 300 BC, and distributed from central Mexico, or what's now central Mexico, into the southwest, so you have a lot of like the people from that region that use corn, and it goes all the way up into the Cahokia mounds, in Chicago area, Illinois. When the pilgrims, like landed in the Wampanoag territory, they already had corn over there. So that just means that, people from the South had already contacted, people from the Northeast, so the corn is really, really important in our rites of passage, so we decorate with corn and have a lot of food with corn. And then for the young, like folks that are assigned female at birth, like, they're considered like a shilonen, which is like the, like the ripeness, the right, like the young ripe corn, and with the, and so what we associated with Xochipilli and Xochiquetzal, which is like the embodiment of like that youthful, playful, like flowery medicine, herbs, and also like, sexuality and like, sensuality and like the senses, so we just had all of the senses. It was really beautiful. We had the kids on a throne, so we like made like this little throne, and like, there's like 4 people carrying them, and we're like throwing flowers and like saying their names. And the really important thing that I think, has helped us, because, a lot of our kids, because of how we've really challenged gender norms in traditional spaces, was like, okay, there's masculine and feminine, right? Not male and female, right? There's masculine energy, and we all have masculine energy. We all have feminine energy. And you, throughout your life, are going to express yourself according to those energies in different ways. And wherever you're at, like, it's perfect, And so we had in our traditions, the East is the masculine, so we had, couples, we had, like, men, women, queer folk in those directions, in all of the different directions, and in the West is the feminine, in the north is the elders and ancestors, so their grandparents, people like elders in the community, and then people reminding them who their ancestors were, especially if like, like for instance, like our family, like I lost my dad, my brother, so that like my mom talked to them about them, and reminding them like, hey, they would be proud of you for today, and then on the south was like the young people, so like, some of the people in our community that, maybe they're not like teenagers or something, but they're like younger people in our community, or people that just have a really strong like youthful energy that our kids like admire, and and so having them talk to them, and then also babies, like we had like, some of the parents that have like new babies in our community, like, talk to them and just talk to them about how they perceive them, and how, their children are looking to them as like, as, like older kids, and then in the center, we had the parents and our two spirit relatives, our trans relatives, give them counsel so that they know like, they that they have like, the the support of like their biological family and their chosen family, right? Because this kalpuli for us has been, for me at least, like kind of an extension of my practice as a queer person, right? In that you choose your family, right? Because a lot of us are detribalized, so we didn't grow up in like a traditional indigenous family where we grew up like on a res, or, where we grew up like practicing our traditions, like, in very overt ways. So the concept of chosen family is very like serious to us, and it's life saving, and then the last direction, the seventh direction, which is a teaching that we learned from Grandma Emma Coyote, who's Lipana Pachen Carrizo Come Crudo of of the tribal people that are from the lands that we are in. She taught us that the seventh direction is this direction that we make ourselves. So in that direction, we asked the young people to, to celebrate the other kids, so that it was like their turn to like build community and look outward. And they gave like little gifts to like all the other like little kids. And I mean, we had kids from like, 0 to like 12, and like a group of like maybe two or three that were 12, that we passed on like a bundle. So, the idea of the coming of age in the 13, was that, at the 13th you get your first bundle. When you turn 26, you get your second bundle. So I guess, by the time that you get to be an elder, you've already accumulated four bundles, right? And so the 12-year-olds, we gave them like a little bundle with 12 and then a loose reed, and we're just like, next year, when it's your turn, we're going to put this bundle in here and you'll have it to complete your altar to yourself, right? And so they were assigned like, after this, like take all of these gifts that your community has given you, and you create your altar at home, and you're going to be responsible for that, and taking care of it and bringing life to it, making sure that there's candles, that there's water, that there's seeds, that there's wind,
That's
like you're,
incredible. That's incredible.
yeah,
Wow. That sounds like such a powerful ceremony.
it was beautiful.
I can picture people in the circle with, elders on one side and men and masculine people on one side, women and femme people on the other side, baby. That's just incredible. So how does this ceremony include trans and non-binary youth, and how does your work in general include queer and trans people?
Well, like I said, for the direction of the earth, that was the direction that we, assigned to our queer, trans, two spirit, relatives to have palabra or recommend. So in each of the directions, they gave them counsel based on the energy that they, whether it's masculine, feminine, like the ancestors and elders, the youth, so like the past and the future, and then with the center, it was just like, this is what's going to ground you, right? And so the parents were like the concept of like the universe, right? Or like the heavens, the like the celestial beings, because it's just like, we're going to be your ancestors, but also like everything that's around you, like we're going to always be here to like make sure that you have everything you need. And our two spirit relatives held the space for the earth, because it's like, in your own identity, you're going to find your grounding. And the nature of the earth is fluid, and it's masculine and feminine, it's destruction and creation, it's fertilizing, and like all of that the earth, encompasses, and also like, letting them see themselves reflected in our two spirit relatives, because our children, like my child, we see that had their ceremony, like they've gone back and forth over the last couple years, but they're non-binary, sometimes like they'll use strictly they them, and then other times they're like, oh well, I'm okay with he him, sometimes, but I'm non-binary, because like they've been asking, about their gender identity since they were like 5, they're like, Mom, am I a girl or a boy? I'm like, you are whoever you want to be, and they've just like, okay. And I'm just like, I think I'm a they, them. And I was like, all right, cool. And because of that, like it's just never been like a big deal, like we're just like, yeah, whatever, and just supporting them and letting them know that it's like, it's not a novelty, and it's not like something like that we have to make a big deal out of, right? It's just who you are, and that's who you are. Like you wouldn't treat a male child, or or a a quote unquote female child that way. So why would you treat like, a non-binary or two-spirit child any different, and
And
so
how
that's
about
kind of been our thing.
totally. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It sounds like that ceremony is very inclusive. And of course your home. So thank you for being such a supportive parent. I wish that for all of us. And what about your other pieces of work in terms of your other danza or your other doula, either birth doula, death doula? How is it inclusive of multiple gender identities or trans people? How does that look for you?
Yeah, so with the danza, when we first started building our community or our group, I mean, we never really like set out to start a group. Like we were totally fine like being a part of other people's groups, but we just found ourselves like not safe in some of those spaces, right? Because of either our queerness or our femininity. There was unfortunately, there, just like anywhere else, there's people that prey on new people, and unfortunately a lot of that sometimes comes from like, sexual harassment or inappropriate like behaviors or advances and things. And so because of that, experiencing that early on, I was kind of outcasted for whistleblowing, in some spaces. And being that, I'm a queer person, and like, I've been very lucky that my mom, I grew up primarily with my mom, and it was just never, it was like a non-issue, like, I mean, sometimes they would like tease me and just like, you never bring a boy home. Like, are you a lesbian? I'm just like, I've never brought anybody home. I'm like, it's not that I like girls or boys, like whoever, like I just haven't met anybody that's worth bringing home, But when I do, like, like they'll, you'll know or whatever, and I like they just never made like my sexuality like a thing. And when I did talk about it to my mom, like, I think she was probably more pissed at me having like like sex with boys than like, than like my sexuality, and so like, I don't, there was just like not like it was just never like something that I was like treated badly for, which I'm very grateful for, because I know that a lot of my queer relatives didn't have that same experience. Like my mom always just embraced who I was, and was really just concerned about my safety, and so, I feel like I carry that into like when we started forming our group, right? Because, what I do remember, being told in the danza that we couldn't play certain instruments, or that we couldn't do certain things, or that we had to dress a certain way, because we were women. And I was just like, well, a lot of us have come into this community and do this danza because we're healing from sexual assault at the hands of men, of cis men. So then what are we supposed to do if you're telling me that, a woman can't can't drum or can't play the conch shell, or has to wear a skirt, or whatever, and so I pushed back on that like very early on, which was about like almost 20 years ago, and so nowadays, like, you see a lot more like women in our community drumming and like playing the conch shell, and like nobody like bats an eye, but like back then, like this was like in the mid 2000s, um like um like I was one of the people that was like really like pushing back on that, and then the other thing too is like, going to sweat lodges, like a lot of times we were told like, you have to wear a skirt, and so, like I received permission to run sweat lodges, and I'm learning, and there's been times that I've gotten things wrong too, like where, people in our community have been accused of like homophobia or transphobia, and we've had to like pause completely in doing, certain activities, for the sake of like going through like accountability processes that have taken years to resolve themselves, but we just like, can like hold steadfast of like, we're prioritizing the safety of like, our queer and trans relatives. And if you can't get with that and like change your behavior, then we're not going to work with you, and you can get mad about it or you can shift, and some people have shifted, some people have just, not been safe. And so I feel that our group as a Kalpuli like really prioritizes queer matriarch-led work in the sense that, we've kind of already vetted like our community, like that, or folks that are adjacent to our community, to where we can with not with the sense to like condemn people, but just with the sense of like protection of just being like, hey, there's a lot of people in our community. These are the spaces that, you're not going to experience, you know, um, like being told that you can't wear pants, if you're a trans man, or if you're transitioning, where people are gonna honor your pronouns, right? And they're not gonna misgender you on purpose, or like question your transition or something, and so that's been really important to us, is just making sure that we're accountable to each other that way, and that we know how to pivot when we're being told like that we're doing something wrong, or not something wrong, but that something that we're doing could be better, because even like our ceremony, right? Like, our tlaquilo, who's the person that documents like our ceremonies, they're like the artist, they're non-binary, right? And the artwork that they made for our invitation, like it was I told you that it was like Xochipilli and Xochiquetzal, right? Xochiquetzal is the feminine manifestation of like youthfulness and like sensuality, and Xochipilli is like the prince, right? Like the masculine, right? But they're both fluid, right? And so the way that they drew them in the like quote unquote like codice, right? Because the way that they see their work, their name is worth mentioning too. Their name is Red. They do Red's body art, and so they're amazing, amazing. Like we also we're really blessed to have them as our scribe, And so this invitation, they had the Xochipilli have a little bit more, that is typically a masculine form in the codices, like more femme, right? And the Xochiquetzal, like more like a little bit more like mass. So it was just like that, those gender switches, which I think looked so beautiful, and it was so affirming for our young people, because we also have like, like younger kids that are like 9 or 10 that, were born, female assigned, at birth, but they're just like, like I don't like to wear skirts, and so, we're just like, well, you can wear pants, and then if you want to wear a skirt, you can, and so we've kind of just like pushed back on some of those like traditional
Yeah.
things.
I just want to reflect what I'm hearing and throw in some resonance. So it sounds like, and I love this journey that you're sharing. It's rather than like this official like we're gonna start a trans ceremony or a two-spirit kalpuli per se. I mean, that'd be fine. It sounds like it's over the deep, what they call principled struggle, just deep 20 years of working with people, pushing back, also being held accountable, asking for what you want, making space, seeing who's not at the table, who needs to be included, and just that deep struggling in community together to create this shared space where as many people, not as many people as possible, but that as many genders can be represented, and that whoever y'all's children are, whoever your people are, they can show up with as much of their full self as possible and not feel like they have to check their gender at the door to embrace their traditions, or check their traditions at the door in order to embrace their full gender. Like, you can really have it have both in the community that I hear that you're a part of, and that you've been vital in shaping that and creating those spaces. So that's super dope. I want to thank you. I honor that. um and just throwing in some resonance, I know that that is just such a difficult cutting edge conversation that so many indigenous people, myself included, that are part of honoring, getting back to our ways, because so many of us were disconnected for different reasons.
Yeah.
So as we come back to it, yeah, can we say, hey, person running the sweat, I really don't want to wear a skirt? Or, hey, person wearing the sweat, here's my assignment, but I would like to wear a skirt. Or, that I know so many people are in that conversation around honoring traditions, but also how can our traditions be flexible and adaptive, which I believe they always were. um and how can we make space for our full selves, our full gendered selves, in our traditions. I think that that is so what's being talked about, and I'm so glad to hear that there's a community in so-called San Antonio, Texas, that is like so inclusive. So even if someone is not a part of your kalpuli, which I'm going to ask you in a moment what a kalpuli is, um how could, let's say, a trans youth is nearby, but they've never heard of y'all, could they just roll up and get involved? Could they, how can, is it a closed community you have to be a part of? Tell me a little bit more about what a kapuli is, and how can people outside of it learn more about this medicine, or get a little bit for themselves if they fit the, if it makes sense.
Yeah, so I mean, I think for a lot of folks, the entry point into the Calpuli has been the danza. So that's kind of one of the things that we first open up to like a lot of people. And we have a pretty consistent open practices on Sundays at San Pedro Park, which is one of the parks here in San Antonio that's connected to the springs that are part of like, the ancestral like creation stories of the region. So that's always open, to
I want
community.
to hear
And then
about
we
those
also have,
springs in a moment.
oh yeah, there's like so much to share about those, and so we have practices there, and those are open to beginners, so we usually have like there is some seasons where we kind of like take a pause, usually around ceremony seasons, because then on the weekends we have ceremonies on Saturday and Sunday sometimes, so that we can't always like be there on Sundays. But our Kalpuli is like established enough to where um it doesn't just fall on one person, which it used to be me for like so long. But I'm really grateful that, our relatives have like, really like stepped in. And that's also part of like
And
how
what
we
is a
queer like our
kalpuli for
leadership.
folks who don't know?
And so like the Kalpuli, traditionally the Kalpuli is a set, it's kind of, it's like a clanship system, right? So it's a group of 20 families that ancestrally was how we organized ourselves in kind of like quote unquote municipalities to be able to share land together and resources. so that whatever things we were producing on the land we shared, and it was very socialist, and and it was like each head of the household or each family had like a voice in the councils and things like that. So it was a way of forming councils and kinship to each other based on like land, right? Obviously, now because of detribalization and colonization and like borders and things, like that's not possible anymore. So the Kalpuli now for us has been a tool for revitalizing like our communities and retribalizing ourselves based on kinship. And I mean, we haven't reached 20 families, I think we're like at nine, like nine or 10 maybe, and I mean, eventually I think we would like to get some land together, and we've talked about it. And I think, right now is like definitely the time to have those conversations. But of course, capital is always a thing. But ideally, like we would be sharing land, but for us, we share ceremony, right? So it's like whenever we have ceremony, everybody comes in and we kind of like get in where you fit in and pitch in where it's needed, and so there's different roles within the Kalpuli. So, like my role is a Siwatlatoki Tlense Siwatlatoki, which is like the primary spokesperson. So me and my partner, um, we hold that role. And when we were initiated as a Kalpuli through our teachers, we were just like, we want to do this a little bit different because we don't want to centralize like one person as being like the chief spokesperson or the chief or whatever. We want to do it as families, um so it was like my family was the first, the chief spokesperson, and then like the co-chief spokespeople are like a pair of sisters, our Santibáñez family, which is Luisana and Madeleine Santibáñez. And so they kind of share that principal role. And if you really think about it, like they're the pillars of like the spiritual house, right? Or the spiritual community. And then we have like supporting roles where like our fire keepers, the people that hold like our like the fire that's been passed down to our group,
Sure.
the folks that carry the conch shell, and then we have people that carry like our our flag or
Mm-hmm.
our pantli, which like the pantli represents kind of like your clan's flag. And so that process we went through it together to determine like, well, what do we want to represent? And that's where we got our name Ayolopaxing. It was like a collective
Ah,
process where when we were getting prepared for that initiation, we were like, well, what are the things that brought us together, and why are we committed to each other, and so that's so Ayolopaxing means the sacred medicine of the heart of the water, which is where the
wow.
springs come in,
Absolutely.
and
So I would love to hear. We just have a few more minutes, but
mhm.
I want to hear about these springs in San Antonio. In part because I'm obsessed with underground processes in the underworld. Uh,
Oh my God,
um,
you're gonna love it.
oh my God, that cenotes, underwater springs, all these things. But also, can you go back to my question about how can if there's a trans or non-binary youth
Oh yeah,
who's
so
listening, how
so
can they? Yes.
yeah, so then through the Kalpuli, like they can come to the danza practice. We usually just ask folks to bring an offering to the altar, and that can be like flowers, tobacco, fruit, something to share, just something in reciprocity for the space that we hold. But then we're also really involved in our community. Like we do a lot of like marches. We do a lot of like blessings for like different events. We put on cultural events, where we bring
Yes.
where we bring like or partner with people in our community to bring different artists. We're artists ourselves, so we do like, different types of like gatherings. And so, you can just plug into like
Yeah.
our Instagram. We're not really that active on Facebook. Like I think, most of the people in our group like are kind of in a generation where they just don't keep up with Facebook that much.
Understood.
So
Understood.
we don't really like have anybody to manage that page anymore. But I help manage the Instagrams, so people
That's
can always reach
beautiful.
out through Instagram. And we have a sweat lodge, that we just
Mhm.
revamped, so we
Praise
in
it.
2021, yes. Yeah, in 2021, Start the Wave and Honor the Earth, we did some fundraising and we got a couple grants to do some like intensives with like different communities in Mexico that that taught us about like different types of sweat lodges that were made out of adobe. So that's our goal. But right now it's just out of wood and like we cover it with like tarps and blankets and
Yeah, yeah.
stuff. Um,
That's
but
our
that's
that's how
other
we
thing
do
that
it.
we have.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I know
yeah.
the
And so we have
Temescal,
that.
y'all got the nice Temescal adobe situation.
No,
Uh
well, that's our hope. That's our
that's
hope.
right,
Like,
right.
so if y'all know
Um
anybody that can fund that, like, let me know so
hey,
we
that's
can
a great
apply.
fundraising effort.
Yes,
And so,
yes.
our final question before we wrap up is, I'm just curious. I mean, you have a trans baby of your own, and I imagine you just give all kind of advice. But if you have any just words of encouragement or wisdom for the trans young folks who might be listening to our show, just anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just knowing that being non-binary, being trans is just such a blessing.
Yes.
Like it's just such a blessing and such a powerful like medicine to hold in Indigenous communities, right? Because not everybody can see or feel the things that, trans and non-binary folk, queer folk like hold, right? Which is the ability to move like back and forth between the masculine and feminine, between, and I feel like that's one of the biggest teachings about like, queering the leadership in our group that, we are that and like just the teachings that we get from like transformative justice movement. And when you really put that into practice and abolitionist ideologies of just being able to hold both and, right? And for some people, it's a big, big challenge to deconstruct that binary way of thinking that usually, gives people ultimatums about what they can or can't be, And so I feel that, that's one of the beautiful gifts of being trans, is that you're able to be both, and in that, like, really like be who you are. And that's so sacred. And the way that I've seen it show up in ceremony, and in ceremonial community and in kinship community, when it's respected and honored as its own medicine, is that it really is like a force to be reckoned with, like it's so powerful, like I mean, seriously, like I've been in ceremony where, when you give that leadership to lead the prayer to a trans person, like, you know, like the wind starts blowing and like, like the fire just like, like just gets really like big, and it's just like so powerful, like, when the song, like, so, if there's ever any doubt that you are not that, like, just remember like your ancestors, right? And what they were not able to do that you are able to do now, and stepping into, a ceremonial space or a space where that, that non-binary and trans existence is seen as and preserved and protected as sacred, um, like belongs to you, like everybody belongs, and we all benefit from our trans relatives living in their fullness, right? Like I think that that's, one of my biggest blessings is just having our trans community, like, trust me, because I mean, even as a two-spirit queer person myself, like I'm hella femme presenting, so like, I've definitely been in situations where people try to say like messed up stuff about, my relatives, and I'm just like, no, that's not gonna fly, And so, I think just knowing that there's people in our community that will like cut for you, like
Yes. Yes.
we're out there and we're trying to build communities together, and yeah, like just remember
Thank you.
how sacred that medicine is.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I want to say it twice for the people in the back. You are a gift. You are anointed. You are a blessing. To live one life in multiple genders is incredible. Thank you for that perspective. I share that perspective. I don't think that trans and two-spirit people need to uh, shrink themselves into any binary cisgender model or mold, that we don't need to aspire to pass, quote unquote pass, or to be what have you. There's strength in our multiple representations, and that it is a gift, it is an anointing to be able to go between camps, between genders. And thank you so much for uplifting that. And thank you for
Mm.
all of your wisdom and medicine. What a gift that the folks down there have in Texas and in Mexico, and you and your whole community. What a gift your community must be for the city of San Antonio. If I'm ever in that area, I can't wait to sit in the circle with y'all. It's been an honor to get
Yeah.
to know you and to talk to you, and thank you for blessing our audience with your wisdom.
Yes, no, anytime you want to come out here, we'll, put a sweat together and, just chop it up, have a potluck.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, take
Write a
good
play.
care. Absolutely. Well, take good care.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much.